Judge Pierce slammed his gavel, demanding the little boy be removed from court, but 9-year-old Jordan Ellis refused to leave. With trembling hands, he opened his folder and spoke words that silenced the entire room. Under Federal Rule 17. I have the right to defend my mother. In that moment, laughter turned to disbelief, and a hidden truth about the system began to crack wide open. Would you have had the courage to stand up for justice like he did? If this story moves you, hit like and share it now. Let's step inside the courtroom where it all began. I was there the morning the courtroom turned into a stage for ridicule. Montgomery's small courtroom felt too bright, the overhead lights washing every face until the smirks looked painted on. People leaned forward on wooden benches, elbows tight, whispering like the verdict was already a joke they all knew. The air carried that dry, dusty smell of old paper and polished floors, clean but not kind. Then the door opened and a child walked in, wearing a suit that didn't belong to him. The jacket hung past his wrists, the pants folded into tired cuffs at his shoes. Jordan Ellis, 9 years old, black, stood in the middle aisle and didn't move. His hands trembled, anyone could see that, but his eyes didn't. They found the bench, found the judge, and stayed there steady. Judge Roland Pierce didn't bother to hide his irritation. He peered over his glasses, voice flat and cold. Who allowed this child to speak? At the clerk's table, Mrs. Holloway shifted in her chair. She cleared her throat, papers shaking in her hands. He invoked the guardian absence clause, Your Honor. The words sounded careful, like she knew they'd be unpopular the second they left her mouth. The room reacted the way crowds do when they sense weakness. A few snickers, a low chuckle, then the laughter grew legs and started pacing from bench to bench. Go home, kid. This isn't a school debate. A deputy near the door, white, thick-armed, didn't raise his voice, but he didn't need to. Figures. Only in this neighborhood. He said it to no one in particular, like a habit. People around him smiled into their sleeves. On the first bench, a woman rose so fast her purse hit the floor. Naomi Ellis Jordan's mother. Her voice cracked, but the courage in it didn't. Please, she said, eyes locked on the bench, let him try. He's only trying to help me. Judge Pierce lifted the gavel and brought it down once the wood sharp against wood. This is a court of law, not daycare. The laughter shifted, some relieved, some meaner, now the kind that rides authority like a shield. A bailiff took a step forward. Jordan didn't retreat. He reached into the oversized jacket and pulled out a folder that looked too heavy for him. Tabs, notes, corners, bent from being studied again and again. He held it to his chest like a life preserver. When he spoke, the sound was clear and more surprising than anything calm. Under Federal Rule 17C, he said, I have the right to represent my mother in absence of counsel. It was not loud. It didn't have to be. The words landed like a dropped key in a quiet room, small, precise, metallic. Silence. You could hear the fluorescent bulbs hum. Somewhere a pen clicked, then didn't click again. Faces changed slowly, first confusion, then a kind of uncomfortable stillness. People who had been smiling a minute ago found new places to look. Judge Pierce didn't move at first. Then he lowered his eyes to the file in front of him, flipped one page, then another. The edge of his jaw tightened. I've seen that look on men who've realized the ground under their feet isn't where they thought it was. He wasn't nodding. He wasn't agreeing. But he was thinking, really thinking, and he did not tell the bailiff to continue. Naomi stayed standing, breath shallow, hands twisted in front of her. She looked at her son the way mothers do when they're terrified and proud at the same time. If you've ever seen that look, you know it stays with you. A rustle lifted and died again. The clerk stared down at her desk. The deputy near the door crossed his arms, annoyed that the moment had slipped away from him. Jordan turned one tabbed page in his folder and raised his eyes to the bench again. You could see the fear still there, but it had a partner now resolved, clean and simple. This court, he said, has the authority to hear my motion. No theatrics, no plea for sympathy. Just a child saying the law out loud like a lighthouse listing coordinates. Judge Pierce set the gavel down, not gently, not roughly, deliberately. His lips pressed thin. He looked at the clerk. The clerk didn't glance up. He looked at the bailiff. The bailiff pretended to study a scuff on the floor. Then the judge looked back at Jordan, and this matters didn't dismiss him. The gallery felt different. The laughter had burned off, and what it left was heat. Some faces still held the old contempt, but others shifted eyebrows, lifted mouths, closed backs, straightened as if to say, well, let's hear it then. Naomi swallowed. Jordan, she whispered, barely sound at all. It's okay. He didn't turn. He didn't need to. He knew exactly where she was. And in that quiet, with everybody watching to see which way the wind would blow, the boy in the oversized suit did something I didn't expect. He looked straight ahead, and his expression softened just enough to let you see the weight he was carrying. Then he said, almost to himself, almost to the judge, almost to the room that had tried to laugh him off the floor. 3 weeks earlier, they laughed too. It wasn't a speech. It was a doorway. The judge's eyes narrowed. A vein at his temple pulsed once. He glanced down at the caption on the case file, then back up at Jordan, as if the names could rearrange themselves to make more sense than what he was seeing. Time stretched in that sterile, humming light. If you've ever watched a tide turn, you know it doesn't ask permission. It remembers what belongs to it and takes it back inch by inch. That's what the silence felt like, something returning to its rightful owner. Finally, the judge spoke, voice lower than before. Proceed. One word, but it moved the whole room. I remember the way Jordan's shoulders lifted with a breath he hadn't dared to take. I remember Naomi's hands falling to her sides as if the weight of them had doubled and then vanished. I remember the deputy shifting his stance, part irritation, part curiosity he wouldn't admit to. And I remember the feeling that settled over the benches, the sense that we had all just seen the edges of a story that was larger than we thought, one that would not be kept small, no matter who tried. The boy looked down at his papers, then up again. For a moment, the suit didn't seem quite so big on him. The fluorescent lights hummed on. The clock ticked. Dust hung in the air like tiny witnesses with nowhere else to be. Then, as if the room itself blinked, the colors changed, bright to dim, present to past. The scene softened around the edges, and in my mind's ear I heard the same boy's voice, steadier, now older, by a long 3 weeks. 3 weeks earlier, he said again, and the words rolled back time, like a film reel in reverse, out of the courtroom, out of the polished hallways, out of the building with the metal detector at the door, until we stood in the damp light of a Montgomery hallway that smelled like bleach and too much rain paint curling from the walls in tired curls. That's where the laughter started. That's where the fight began. And that's where we go next. I remember the night the rain wouldn't quit. Riverside sounded hollow when it rained, like the whole building was a drum someone hit from the inside. Water tapped the window frame, slipped through the warped seal, and fell into a little cup on the sill that someone had left there months ago. The radio in the next apartment was playing a sad country song through static. It fit. The hallway light flickered as Naomi Ellis climbed the stairs, keys clenched between her fingers, shoulders wet through her thrift store jacket. When she reached the door, she paused to catch her breath, then smiled the kind of smile you give a child so they won't worry about you. She stepped in and set a thin paperback on the table, wrinkled, cover-torn spine. Found it at the second-hand shop, she said, rain still ticking on her sleeves. Tenant Rights Handbook. She tapped it twice, like knocking on a door she hoped would open. Maybe one day you'll understand it better than the people who wrote it. Jordan was at the little table under a weak lamp pencil, tucked behind his ear, notebook, open with lines of neat, careful handwriting. He picked up the book as if it might break and turned it over, studying the worn corners, like they could tell him where it had been. He didn't say thank you. He nodded, serious, like a promise. Naomi slid off her shoes and winced. I noticed the bandage on her ankle, raw from standing all night. She moved around the kitchen like she knew exactly where her strength would run out and tried to finish before it did. A pan, 2 eggs, a slice of bread. She set half in front of Jordan and took the other half for herself. The roof leaked in a new spot that night. A dark circle spread on the ceiling, then another. Jordan watched the widening stain like a problem he could solve if it would just hold still long enough. He opened the handbook, traced a paragraph with his finger, and finally asked, soft and flat, why do they keep breaking people like us? Naomi leaned against the counter, head tilted back. For a second, she looked like she might cry. Instead, she smiled, tired, sure, but steady. Because they think we won't stand back up. He took that in, eyes on the page. The rain hammered once, then eased into its old rhythm. Somewhere a pipe clanged like a warning no one would hear. Morning came gray and damp. The hallway smelled like bleach and wet shoes. When Naomi opened the door, the paper was already there, thick, official, taped right across the middle like a dare. She froze with her hand on the knob, reading without touching it, as if fingerprints might count against her. I saw her lips move on the big numbers, first $50, $1,000, then the words underneath: willful damage, gross negligence, tenant caused. She made a small sound in her throat, not quite a word. "We didn't do anything," she whispered. Jordan stepped beside her and peeled the notice from the wood. He didn't rip it. He didn't crumple it. He laid it on the table, smoothed the edges, and read every line, every citation, every date. His mouth tightened when he reached the paragraph that called their home uninhabitable due to tenant abuse. He flipped the page, then flipped it back. "See this," he said, tapping a clause about repair requests. "They cite a violation date from before we even moved in." Naomi blinked. "How do you know?" He pulled a shoebox from under the table, the kind that keeps more truth than shoes. Inside were photos, first-day pictures Naomi had taken with a borrowed phone. Jordan sorted them the way you watch someone shuffle cards they already know by heart. He chose one and slid it under the notice so the images touched a jagged crack along the living room wall. He chose another brown webbing over the bathroom ceiling. Each photo had a date stamp, yellow and stubborn, in the corner. The room got quiet in a new way then. Not just rain quiet, decision quiet. Naomi sat down, hard hands clasped so tight her knuckles blanched. "Baby, they have lawyers. They have money. They have the judge. We have—" She searched for the word and didn't find it. Jordan did. Evidence. He set the photos in a neat stack. He took the tenant rights handbook and set it beside them. He drew a rectangle on his notebook, 4 boxes labeled with words he'd copied from the handbook the night before: notice, repair, habitability, retaliation. He started plugging their life into those boxes, line by line, like fitting a puzzle he already knew had all the pieces. Naomi watched him. You could see the shift. Fear didn't leave her face, but it moved over a little to make space for something else. Pride, maybe, or relief that somebody, even a little boy, was willing to carry part of the weight. He paused, looked up, and met her eyes. The tremor in his hands was gone. "They use the law to crush you. I'll use it to protect you." He didn't shout it. He didn't perform it. He meant it. That's what made the hairs on my arms stand up. There's a moment in every fight when the momentum changes, not because the other side gets weaker, but because you finally decide you're done being broken. I felt that moment cross the room like a draft that found the only open window. Jordan pulled a small worn binder from his backpack. He opened to a plastic sleeve and slid the photograph of the cracked wall inside, pressing the edges flat with his palm so no air bubbles would fold the truth. Then he tucked the binder against his chest, walked to the closet, and pulled down a jacket 2 sizes too big. He slipped it on like armor. Naomi stood, reached for the handbook, then stopped. She picked it up and pressed it into his hands instead. "Take this," she said, "just in case the truth needs help speaking." He nodded. No theatrics, no speech. He tucked the book behind the photos, zipped the binder shut, and slipped it inside his jacket. He went to the window and looked out at the rain, lighter now, but persistent, the kind that sticks around long enough to be part of the day. From where I stood, I could see his reflection in the glass, a little boy wearing a man's coat, carrying a case no child should have to carry. The radio down the hall clicked to a different station. Something slow and steady came through the static. Jordan pressed the binder close as if he could keep the pictures warm, then turned from the window. The building groaned, a pipe abeam, or maybe just the sound old places make when they decide not to fall in on themselves. He was already moving when Naomi called his name. He paused at the door, waiting. "Eat something," she said, because mothers say what they can when they can't say anything else. "I will," he said, because sons promise the things they can keep. He opened the door to the gray stairwell. The notice they had peeled off earlier left a faint square of clean wood behind a ghost of something that used to be there and wasn't anymore. He glanced at it once, then stepped into the hall. And just like that, the first piece of the case left that apartment, tucked inside a too-big jacket, headed toward a system that hadn't planned on answering to a child. If you ask me when the fight truly began, I won't say in court. It began here in a kitchen with a leaking ceiling, a handbook with a cracked spine, and a boy who believed the law should serve the people who live under it. I remember the day Vincent Harlow's face filled every TV screen in Montgomery. His voice carried that calm, practiced warmth rich men use when they talk about compassion. "We give homes to struggling families," he said. We give them a second chance." He smiled into the camera. But outside under that same gray sky, his company's trucks were parked along Riverside Street. Crews in matching jackets were tossing couches, cribs, and family photos into the rain. A woman screamed as her mattress hit the curb. Another man bent to pick up a baby's toy before it floated away. That's the kind of harmony power as it says hope while it takes everything from you. That same week, I saw Jordan Ellis at the library again. His backpack was half open, stuffed with old papers, and a binder too heavy for his frame. He sat hunched at a wooden desk tracing case numbers with his finger. When I asked what he was doing, he didn't look up. Judge Pierce handled 17 cases for Vincent Harlow, he said. Harlow won every single one. His voice didn't shake. It was calm, almost analytical, like someone who'd already accepted the truth and was studying how to dismantle it. Across town, Harlow was on the golf course with Judge Pierce. The grass glistened under the morning sun, perfect and expensive. "You handle the law," Harlow said, lining up his shot. "I'll handle the land." Pierce smirked. "Long as it stays out of my courtroom." The ball rolled, perfect aim. Their laughter followed it down the green. But laughter like that always cost someone else their home. Later that afternoon, Jordan walked past a row of evicted families. Old furniture sat in puddles, cardboard boxes sagged under the rain. An elderly black woman sat on the curb clutching her blood pressure medicine. "They said it's progress," she muttered. "But I've lived here 40 years. What's progress mean if I can't afford to stay?" Jordan didn't answer. He just nodded, eyes dark with something heavier than sadness. It wasn't pity anymore. It was understanding. This wasn't just his mother's fight. It was a war that had already claimed too many others. That night the phone rang in the Ellis apartment. Naomi picked up half-asleep voice, hoarse from the night shift. A man's voice, low, steady, professional. "Withdraw the complaint or lose everything." Then silence. Naomi froze, staring at the receiver like it might bite her. Jordan took it gently, replayed the message twice, and then hit record on an old tape deck. "That's intimidation, not law," he whispered. He said it like someone taking notes for later, like a lawyer rehearsing his first cross-examination. But the world has strange ways of shaping people. Before Harlow became the man on TV, he was just a boy in the rain. It was 1973, and his father was shouting with a landlord on that same Riverside block. Rent overdue. Promises broken. The landlord yelled about responsibility. Harlow's father begged for one more week. A storm hit hard and unforgiving, washing through their open door. Boxes floated down the gutter, everything they owned gone in minutes. Little Vincent watched it happen from the steps, soaked, shivering, holding a cracked lamp his mother loved. He didn't cry. He just stared at the landlord's car as it drove away. "Never again," he whispered, and he meant it. He grew up believing power was safety, that mercy was weakness. Somewhere along the way, that belief calcified into greed. Now, decades later, Harlow stood in his corner office, surrounded by glass and light. The skyline reflected across his windows like an empire built on ghosts. His reflection stared back at him, a man in a perfect suit, clean hands, perfect smile. He touched the glass lightly as if testing its strength. The city below pulsed in lights and traffic obedient to his will. He told himself he'd earned it, that the world was a storm, and he'd simply learned to build higher ground. But his reflection didn't nod. It didn't agree. It just looked back, older, emptier, colder. He turned away, jaw tight. Outside, thunder rumbled again. And down on the other side of that city, a 9-year-old boy with a binder full of laws was already walking through the rain, straight toward the man who'd built his empire on broken families. Harlow thought he'd escaped the rain, but someday soon, the rain would find him again. The library was nearly empty that afternoon. Only the hum of the old ceiling fan and the soft shuffle of pages filled the air. The kind of silence that felt respectful, like even the dust knew not to disturb the boy in the back corner. Jordan Ellis sat alone at a wooden desk stacked with law books twice his size. His pencil moved slowly, stopping now and then so he could whisper a line under his breath, testing how it sounded in his mouth. The spines of the books read things like civil procedure, federal jurisdiction, representation of minors. Heavy stuff for a kid who still had homework due in math. From behind the circulation counter, Mr. Coleman watched him for a long while before saying anything. The old librarian had been there 30 years, seen college kids fake study sessions, Lawyers napped through research hours, but he'd never seen a 9-year-old so focused, like every word on the page mattered to someone he loved. He finally walked over Kane, tapping softly against the tile. "Do you even understand those?" he asked, tilting his head toward the mountain of books. Jordan didn't look up right away. He flipped to a highlighted paragraph, tapped it once, and said, "Enough to know they're lying to us?" Coleman blinked. Lying, Jordan nodded, calm but sure. "They say the law protects people who can't defend themselves, but every time it's us in trouble, it suddenly doesn't apply." The old man leaned on his cane, studying him. There was no attitude in the boy's tone, just clarity. Something in it reached a part of Coleman he'd buried years ago. He sat down across from him, motioned slow knees, stiff. "You remind me of my son," he said. He thought the same thing once. Believed the law was a shield if you just held it right. Jordan glanced up. "What happened to him?" Coleman looked at the window where sunlight trembled against the blinds. He believed the system would hear him out. It didn't. His voice softened. He trusted it too much. Silence stretched. Jordan looked back at the open page, then at the man's hands, thin-weathered, still trembling a little. He pushed one of the books forward. Then maybe he was holding the wrong part of it. A slow smile cracked through the old man's face, the first real one in years. "Maybe he was," he said. From then on, Coleman started stopping by Jordan's table more often. He'd pretend to be dusting shelves or checking inventory, but always ended up helping the boy decode legal language. Together they read through cases, discussed motions, learned where power hides between the lines. One afternoon, Coleman slid a small document across the desk. "You ever heard of next friend representation?" he asked. Jordan shook his head. "It's rare," Coleman explained. "It lets a minor represent someone else in court when no capable adult can. The clause was meant for emergencies. Most lawyers don't even use it." Jordan's eyes widened. "But it's real," Coleman nodded. "Real enough to make men in suits sweat." Jordan sat back, gears turning behind his eyes. "Then that's how I can help her," he said quietly. Coleman just watched him for a moment. "You're something else, kid." Days turned into weeks. The library became their war room, stacks of books, highlighted statutes, scribbled notes. Sometimes Naomi would stop by to bring sandwiches, but she'd always leave early, coughing a little harder each time. Her steps were slower, her shoulders thinner. One evening, Jordan stayed late. The library lights flickered as Coleman locked up. The boy looked exhausted but determined, surrounded by papers marked with his cramped handwriting. Coleman noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "You should rest, son," he said. Jordan shook his head. "I can't. If I stop, they win." The old man sighed, reaching into his jacket pocket. From it, he pulled out a silver pen, smooth, slightly scratched, the kind lawyers used when signing things that change lives. "This signed my last case," Coleman said, setting it gently on the desk. "Maybe it'll win yours." Jordan picked it up, thumb brushing the engraving near the clip. He met Coleman's eyes, steady and sure. "I'll make sure it writes truth this time." For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the late sun poured through the dusty windows, cutting the room in half light on one side, shadow on the other. It hit the silver pen first, then slid across both their faces, joining them in the same golden glow. Coleman looked at him and saw not just a boy, but a continuation, a spark he thought had died when his son did. "Don't ever let them take that from you," he said. Jordan nodded, sliding his notes into the binder, the pen tucked safely inside. When they left, the library door creaked closed behind them, echoing through the empty halls. The last beam of sunlight hung on the wall a moment longer, two shadows stretching side by side, one tall, one small, before fading together into the dusk. And just like that, the torch had passed. The morning light hit different that day, sharp, white, and merciless. It poured through the blinds of their small apartment, catching the steam from Naomi's coffee like smoke on a battlefield. She stood by the door, pale but steady, watching Jordan button his oversized suit jacket, the same one he wore to church on Easter, now carrying a stack of legal papers instead of a Bible. Her hand trembled as she fixed his collar. "Be brave, son," she whispered. "Just speak the truth. The truth always finds its way home." Jordan nodded. He didn't say a word, just hugged her tight, the kind of hug that carried both promise and fear. When he stepped outside, the sun hit his face hard. He squinted but didn't stop walking. The courthouse looked even bigger up close. Its marble steps stretched high, the kind that made grown men hesitate. But Jordan climbed them one by one, clutching his binder like it was a shield forged from every long night in the library. Inside, the air was cold, smelling of paper and polish. He walked straight to the counter where Mrs. Holloway, the clerk, sat tapping her pen. She looked up and blinked in surprise. "Sweetheart," she said with a half-smile, "this isn't story time. You lost, Jordan." Shook his head, setting the folder gently on the counter. "No, ma'am. I'm here to file a motion for next friend representation in the case of Ellis v. Harlow Properties." She blinked again, a little slower this time. "You're what 10-9, he corrected politely. "And I'm filing under Federal Emergency Clause 17C. My mother is currently unable to represent herself due to medical incapacity." Holloway chuckled, but her voice wavered. "Honey, I don't think children can file lawsuits." Jordan didn't flinch. "Could you please cite the statute that forbids a minor from filing under emergency representation?" Her smile faltered. Around them, the room went quiet. A man by the copier stopped mid-print. A secretary paused mid-sentence. Holloway adjusted her glasses, rifling through the manual on her desk. The pages flipped one after another, but she found nothing. Jordan stood there, patient but unyielding. Finally, she sighed, motioning for her supervisor. Whispers followed. 2 phone calls. A short meeting behind glass walls. Jordan waited, his small fingers resting on the silver pen Coleman had given him. He didn't fidget, didn't move, just breathed. Then, after what felt like hours, the clerk returned. She didn't look at him when she spoke. "Your motion has been accepted." The stamp came down hard, "accepted." The sound echoed through the office like a gunshot. Jordan blinked once, almost as if to make sure he'd heard it right. Then quietly, "Thank you, ma'am." From a shadowed corner, Mr. Coleman watched. His old hands rested on his cane, his eyes shining not with surprise but with pride. As Jordan walked past, the other clerks whispered to each other. Holloway waited until he was almost out the door before leaning toward her colleague. "He's not the first kid who tried to take Harlow down," she murmured. Her co-worker frowned. "What happened to the others?" Holloway hesitated. "They didn't make it this far." The words hung heavy in the air. Jordan didn't hear them, but something in him must have felt the shift, the way danger quietly steps closer when you finally start to win. Outside, the heat pressed against his face. He stopped for a second at the top of the courthouse steps, watching cars crawl through the street below. Somewhere in that city, a man was watching him too. In his glass office, Vincent Harlow leaned back in his chair, eyes on the muted TV screen, where a local news anchor was already talking about the child who filed his own case. His reflection floated beside the headline. A cold smile spread across his lips. "Find out who's feeding that kid," he said. His assistant swallowed hard. "And if no one is," Harlow looked back at the screen, "then find out what he's eating and make sure he chokes on it." The screen faded to black, but the sound of that courthouse stamp still lingered, one echo louder than all his threats. By the end of that week, the fight had turned ugly. It started with a headline, "Local boy lawyer caught in lie," splashed across every screen in Montgomery. Then came the video grainy footage of Naomi Ellis, hammer in hand, striking the wall of her own apartment. The voiceover said she'd faked the damage to frame her landlord. The clip spread faster than truth ever could. Within hours, Shock's fake kid lawyer was trending. News anchors debated whether the Ellis case was a publicity stunt. Talk shows laughed about the boy who thought he could outsmart the law. Naomi sat at the kitchen table, pale and trembling, watching it loop on her phone. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it. "Jordan," she whispered, voice breaking, "maybe we stop. Maybe this is too much." Jordan stood in the doorway, binder in hand, jaw set tight. "If we stop, they win forever." His mother looked at him, tears in her eyes. "They're destroying us, baby." "They already did," he said softly. "I'm just trying to rebuild what's left." That night, when the world went quiet and even the streetlights buzzed like they were tired, Jordan slipped out with his backpack. The public library loomed in the dark, closed for the night, but one light glowed inside. Mr. Coleman never went home early. Jordan tapped on the glass until the old man opened the door, rubbing his eyes. "You know I could lose my job for this, right?" Jordan stepped inside, voice steady. "Then I'll make sure they give it back when this is over." Coleman chuckled quietly, shaking his head. "You really are something, kid." Jordan headed straight to the computer terminals. He knew what he was looking for: city inspection photos, the ones proving the apartment damage existed before they moved in. But every link came up: access denied, locked, encrypted, restricted by Harlow Development Holdings. He stared at the screen, fists trembling. He owns the city's data servers. Not officially, Coleman muttered, but enough to keep truth buried. Jordan's voice dropped to a whisper. Then we dig. Coleman sat beside him, hands moving faster than expected for a man his age. His old librarian login gave partial access, but even that wasn't enough. The system fought back firewalls, warnings, red screens flashing, unauthorized activity detected. Then Coleman leaned closer, typing in something Jordan didn't recognize. A forgotten override code. The files unlocked. Jordan's breath hitched as the thumbnails loaded hundreds of photos, time-stamped 3 months before his family moved in. Cracked walls, leaking pipes, mold spreading like cancer across the ceilings. Every image was proof of Harlow's fraud. He clicked print all. The printer roared to life, spitting out pages fast until it didn't. A sudden spark, a hiss of heat, and the paper jammed. Smoke curled from the tray. The edges of the top sheet turned black. Jordan panicked, yanking the pages free, fanning them to stop the burn. The corners were singed, but the words, the evidence, survived. He sank to the floor, clutching the papers to his chest, tears streaking down his face. It's okay, Coleman said softly, kneeling beside him. They'll fight dirty. They always do, but fire can't destroy the truth. It only makes it visible. Jordan wiped his eyes, nodding. His silver pen had fallen from his pocket. He picked it up, holding it tight, his knuckles white. Even if the system burns, he whispered, truth doesn't. Coleman smiled faintly. You're right. Even the law trembles before truth, son. But it still stands. They sat there on the library floor, surrounded by ash and paper, two figures against a mountain of darkness. The boy's small hands held evidence powerful enough to shake a city. The old man's shadow stretched beside him, steady, unbroken. Outside, thunder rolled over Montgomery, again echoing against courthouse walls and glass towers. Somewhere far above, Vincent Harlow watched the trending hashtags fade and smiled, thinking he'd already crushed the boy. But in that dim library, truth had just been reborn from smoke. And for the first time, the system should have been afraid. 3 weeks later, the courthouse was unrecognizable. News vans lined the street. Cameras crowded the steps. Reporters shouted over one another, fighting for a shot of the 9-year-old boy who had done what no one else dared take on the city's most powerful landlord and lived to see the next hearing. The headlines called him the boy who filed alone. Some said it with admiration. Others said it with mockery. But either way, the whole country was watching. Inside courtroom 3B, the tension was a living thing. The air was heavy, thick with whispers and the whine of camera shutters. Judge Roland Pierce sat high above robes sharp and temper sharper. He scanned the room, his gaze landing on Jordan, who stood beside his mother at the defense table. Pierce sighed, already annoyed. Let's end this circus, he said flatly. But Jordan didn't flinch. He stepped forward, pulling a small stack of papers from his binder, half burned around the edges, still smelling faintly of smoke. With the court's permission, he began, I'll be presenting photographic evidence from city inspection records dated 3 months before our tenancy. These images were retrieved from restricted databases under municipal law, section 142 BA. Every word came clean and deliberate. No stutter, no fear, just focus. Leonard Drake Harlow's attorney stood abruptly. Objection! This is outrageous. He's been coached. Judge Pierce frowned. By whom? Drake hesitated. By someone manipulating this child for personal gain. Jordan turned to him, calm and direct. If you believe truth requires coaching, then maybe you've forgotten what law is for. The courtroom fell still. Even Pierce's gavel hesitated midair. Jordan continued, his small hands gripping the singed photos. These documents prove that Mr. Harlow's company knowingly leased uninhabitable property and falsified inspection reports. Every image aligns with prior damage: mold-cracked walls, structural decay. And these he raised, the charred corners, survived your client's attempt to erase the record. Drake's face flushed red. You're accusing a respected businessman of evidence tampering. You have no authority to. Actually, I do, Jordan interrupted softly. Under Federal Rule 17C, I'm my mother's legal representative in absence of counsel. The court has recognized my standing. Pierce's lips pressed thin. He couldn't argue with that Jordan's filing had already been validated. The boy looked up at the judge's eyes, steady, unblinking. Your Honor, before we continue, I respectfully request your recusal from this case due to undisclosed financial ties to Mr. Harlow. The words landed like a thunderclap. The gallery gasped. Cameras clicked in rapid fire. Reporters leaned forward, pens frozen midair. Judge Pierce froze. What did you just say? Jordan opened another file records Coleman had helped him retrieve. You hold 800 shares of Harlow Development Corporation purchased through your pension fund in 2018. And your country club membership is paid annually by the Montgomery Landlords Association, chaired by the plaintiff, Mr. Harlow. For a moment, the room stopped breathing. Harlow shot up from his seat, face red with fury. You little sit down, Vincent Drake, hissed, tugging him back. But the damage was done. Judge Pierce slammed his gavel hard enough to echo through marble walls. Court will recess immediately. He left without another word. Cameras flashed as he disappeared through the side door. The gallery erupted, half in disbelief, half in triumph. Outside, within an hour, every news outlet in the state was running the same headline: Boy lawyer exposes judge's conflict of interest. The story spread like wildfire. By morning, the Judicial Ethics Committee had launched an investigation. Public outrage followed petitions, protests, demands for accountability. The city that once laughed at Jordan now stood behind him. 24 hours later, the official statement came. Judge Roland Pierce suspended pending ethics review. When court reconvened the next day, a new nameplate sat on the bench: Judge Evelyn Carter, a woman known for her fairness and her refusal to bow to power. She looked out over the packed courtroom, then at Jordan, standing small but unshaken. Justice delayed, she said, voice calm, but sharp, is justice denied. Let's make sure this case reminds the city what those words mean. The gallery burst into applause. Even reporters stood. And for the first time, it felt like the system itself had begun to tremble, like the machine that crushed so many might finally be turning against its master. The tide was shifting, and a 9-year-old boy had made it move. It started with an email. Evelyn Shaw had read hundreds of them, working for Vincent Harlow, but this one froze her where she sat. Subject line: evidence, suppression, Ellis case. The message was short, brutal, and unmistakable. Purge remaining inspection records. Transfer blame to maintenance logs. No traces. For a long time, she just stared at it. Her reflection glowed faintly against the screen-tired eyes, trembling lips, the faint scar on her wrist she hadn't noticed in years. The same wrist that once clutched her mother's hand as sheriff's deputies threw their furniture into the rain. That eviction had Vincent Harlow's name on it too. Tears slid down her face, silent and steady. She'd told herself for years that working for him was survival, that she couldn't change what he did, only keep her head down and keep her job. But now she saw what her silence had built. The next morning, she packed a flash drive into her coat pocket and walked out of Harlow Development for the last time. The Ellis apartment smelled faintly of coffee and fear. Naomi was sitting at the table going through unpaid bills when the knock came. Jordan looked up from his notes pen, hovering mid-sentence. On the other side of the door stood a woman in a gray trench coat, rain dripping from her hair. Mrs. Ellis, she asked softly. Naomi hesitated. Yes. The woman pulled a small USB drive from her coat. These files prove your innocence. They include inspection photos, court correspondences, and internal memos from Harlow's office. Jordan's eyes widened. How did you get them? Evelyn swallowed hard. Because I worked for him. The room went still. Naomi's voice cracked. Then why? Why help us now? Evelyn looked at her eyes, red jaw trembling. Because my mother lost her home to him too. Same lies, same papers. I watched her die believing she failed, but it was him, always him. Jordan stepped forward. If this is real, it could change everything. It is real, Evelyn said. But once you use it, he'll know it came from me. Naomi met her gaze steady for the first time in weeks. Then maybe it's time he knows what it feels like to lose something he can't control. That evening, Harlow's voice thundered through his office like a storm. You think I wouldn't notice a missing drive? He snarled. Evelyn stood by the door, hands shaking but chin high. You destroyed families. You used the law like a weapon. Harlow slammed his fist on the desk. And you used me to climb out of the gutter. Don't forget where you came from." Her eyes flashed with quiet fury. "I came from the homes you burned down, and one of them was mine." She turned and walked out before he could stop her. The next morning, courtroom 3B was overflowing again. The storm outside mirrored the one building inside. Judge Evelyn Carter sat poised, her gavel untouched, but her eyes sharp as glass. Harlow's legal team shifted nervously as Naomi Ellis took the stand. She looked different now, still tired, still fragile, but no longer afraid. Harlow smirked, whispering something to his lawyer. Naomi heard it, and for the first time she smiled back. Then she rose. "You thought fear would silence us," she said, voice clear enough to reach the last row of the gallery. "But it only made us stronger." Harlow's smile cracked. Naomi turned toward Judge Carter. "Your Honor, we request to enter new evidence into the record. A flash drive containing original inspection reports and communications, confirming intentional fraud by Harlow Development." Drake jumped up. "Objection. This evidence is stolen property." Judge Carter's gavel came down once. "Overruled. If it reveals the truth, this court will hear it." Evelyn Shaw, seated in the back, exhaled for the first time in days. The lights in the courtroom seemed brighter now, pouring through tall windows, as if the sun itself had been waiting for this moment. Jordan sat beside his mother, holding her hand, his face lit with quiet pride. Judge Carter studied the screen as the evidence played, the emails, the inspection photos, the signatures. Each image landed like a hammer blow. Vincent Harlow's composure finally cracked. His jaw tightened, eyes darting toward Evelyn, realizing too late that the empire he'd built on fear was collapsing from within. When it was over, the room was silent. Judge Carter looked directly at Harlow. "The court recognizes this evidence as valid and damning. The pattern of deception is undeniable." For the first time, the mighty landlord lowered his head. The gallery murmured a collective release of breath, relief, disbelief, justice. Light flooded the courtroom, cutting through the dust, the tension, the years of silence. And in that moment, everyone could feel it. The system was cracking, and justice was finally beginning to break through. The morning of the final hearing carried a strange kind of silence, one that felt heavier than noise. Even the reporters waiting outside the courthouse spoke softer, as if they understood that what was about to happen wasn't just another trial. Inside courtroom 3B, Vincent Harlow sat on the witness stand for the first time. No lawyers to hide behind, no charm left to weaponize. Just a man, his empire trembling, and a crowd hungry for truth. Judge Evelyn Carter adjusted her glasses and nodded toward the defense table. "Mr. Ellis," she said gently, "you may proceed." The boy rose slowly. His suit still hung loose around his frame, but his presence filled the room. Every eye followed him as he walked to the stand, a single sheet of paper in his hand, edges burned, words still legible. "Mr. Harlow," Jordan began, voice steady, but carrying the weight of everything they'd endured. "Do you deny this inspection report is yours?" He held up the page, the charred edge curling slightly under the courtroom lights. The logo at the top, Harlow Development Holdings, gleamed faintly in the glow. Harlow's eyes darted to the document, then to his attorney, then back to the boy. I don't recall signing that," he said finally, his throat tight. Jordan didn't blink. "Your signature's right there, sir, next to the line that says, 'Confirmed safe for occupancy.'" The gallery rustled, a wave of whispers spreading like wind through dry leaves. Harlow swallowed, jaw clenching. His voice cracked. "On advice of counsel, I plead the fifth." For a moment, even the ceiling fans seemed to stop spinning. No one spoke. The silence was total, thick, unbroken, almost holy. Jordan looked at him for a long moment, then lowered the paper, his eyes soft with something that wasn't triumph, but understanding. He bowed his head slightly and exhaled. It wasn't the cheer of victory, it was the quiet sigh of justice landing exactly where it belonged. Beside him, Naomi covered her face and wept, not out of anger this time, but relief, the kind that shakes you from the inside out. Judge Carter's gavel came down sharp but not harsh. This court finds credible evidence of systemic fraud and ethical violations by Harlow Development. A full investigation will commence immediately. All affected tenants are to receive restitution and temporary housing protections until further notice. The courtroom erupted, not in chaos, but applause. The kind that starts hesitant, then grows fueled by years of silence finally breaking. Harlow sat frozen, staring at the table in front of him. His empire wasn't gone yet, but the illusion of control had shattered completely. His lawyer, Leonard Drake, leaned toward him but said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Then Drake turned to Jordan, eyes filled with something between awe and humility. In 30 years, he said quietly, I've never seen the law used like that. Jordan didn't gloat. He just looked at the man and replied, it's not about using it. It's about remembering who it's for. Judge Carter smiled the kind of smile that carried both pride and sorrow. This young man, she said, voice clear and steady, reminded us all what justice truly means. It's not about power. It's about courage, truth, and the belief that no one is too small to be heard. Her gavel came down again, echoing through the packed courtroom. Court is adjourned. The sound lingered long after the people began to move. As Harlow was led away for questioning, the reporters swarmed cameras flashing like lightning. But in the middle of it all, Jordan stood still beside his mother, holding her hand. They didn't say a word. They didn't need to. Through the tall courtroom windows, sunlight poured in, washing over them in gold. Dust floated in the air like tiny quiet witnesses. Justice hadn't arrested anyone. Not yet. But for the first time, it had looked the right people in the eye. And for everyone watching that day, that was enough. Months later, the city felt different, quieter, lighter, as if some invisible weight had finally been lifted. The banners that once carried Harlow's name had been taken down. His office windows were dark now, the blinds forever closed. The man who had controlled half of Montgomery's housing market was stripped of his license under full federal investigation. Judge Pierce had quietly retired. No press conference, no farewell statement, just a handwritten note to the court clerk, health reasons. But those who had seen him in his final hearing said his hands shook when he signed it. Justice hadn't come fast and it hadn't come easy, but it had come. The morning Naomi Ellis received the final ruling, she didn't cry. She simply held the document close as though it were something fragile and alive. The verdict read, all charges dismissed, damages awarded, case closed. The reporters outside swarmed instantly, microphones thrust forward. Mrs. Ellis, you've changed the city. How do you feel? Naomi smiled faintly, her voice steady and warm. This was never about fame, she said. It was about dignity, the kind every person deserves, no matter where they live or what they look like. In the months that followed, she and Jordan turned their victory into something bigger. With the settlement money, they established the Ellis Foundation for Housing Justice, a small office tucked between two coffee shops downtown where people could walk in with their stories, their documents, their fears, and be heard. On opening day, an elderly black woman stepped inside, her hands trembling as she clutched a letter. She looked at Naomi through tears. Because of you, she said softly, my grandkids have a home again. Naomi held her hands, eyes glistening. No, she replied, because of all of us who refused to stay silent. Jordan stood nearby, sorting through pamphlets. When a reporter asked him what came next, he smiled gently. Justice doesn't end in court, he said. It begins at home. That night, Naomi found him sitting by the window, the silver pen from Mr. Coleman resting beside his notes. You miss him, don't you? She asked. Jordan nodded. He believed I could change something before anyone else did. Naomi smiled. And you did. He looked down at the pen. No, Mom. We did. Months passed. Seasons shifted. Leaves turned gold. And one autumn afternoon, the camera found him again, older, now walking through the Grand Library at Harvard University. His backpack hung heavy with case books, but his steps were light. He paused at a desk near the window, where sunlight spilled across the wood, and opened a small envelope yellowed around the edges. The handwriting was rough but familiar. From Coleman W. Hayes inside was a single line scrawled in black ink. You reminded me why I once believed in law. Keep fighting. Jordan closed the letter and smiled the kind of smile that carried both gratitude and purpose. Outside, students crossed the courtyard, laughter echoing off brick walls. Somewhere, a bell chimed noon. He looked up at the shelves towering over him, the same kind of shelves where he had once spent lonely nights learning the law just to save his mother. And now those shelves no longer felt like walls. They felt like doors. The narrator's voice settles in low and reflective. Maybe the next Jordan Ellis is watching right now. Maybe it's a kid who thinks no one's listening, but justice has a way of finding its voice, even in the smallest hands. A faint piano melody begins, gentle, hopeful like morning light slipping through curtains. Jordan slides a silver pen into his pocket, gathers his books, and walks toward the library doors. The sunlight outside is blinding but warm. He steps through it, head held high. And as the screen fades to black, the final words linger. Justice begins when someone dares to believe they can make it real. Soft piano fades out. Silence. Then credits roll. ChatGPT John Noy. And that was the story of Jordan Ellis, a 9-year-old boy who reminded the world that justice isn't about size, age, or power. It's about heart. His courage showed us that even the smallest voice can shake the walls of a broken system when it speaks the truth. If this story touched you, please like the video and share it with someone who believes in doing what's right even when it's hard. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more powerful tales that shine a light on justice, dignity, and the strength of the human spirit. Your support means the world to us. It's what keeps our creative team inspired to bring you stories that move hearts and open minds. Because here at Mr. Max Stories, every story carries a voice, and every voice deserves to be heard.